The city streets of New Orleans were dark and quiet, but Dr. Samuel Harrington could feel eyes on him. For weeks he had been gathering evidence of the horrors hidden on Belleview Plantation, a sprawling estate where wealth and cruelty intertwined in the most unimaginable ways. Rumors had reached him, whispers of children taken from their mothers, women forced to endure horrors in the name of profit, ledgers detailing generations of abuse. He had contacted abolitionist societies, shared what little proof he could gather, and now the stakes had never been higher. Inside a dimly lit room, Harrington and a small group of men debated their next move. One woman argued for patience, for newspapers in New York and Philadelphia to uncover the scandal, to rally public opinion against the institution of slavery itself. "By the time that happens," she said, "the colonel will have destroyed everything. The children will be gone, witnesses silenced." Harrington's voice rose. "Children are being murdered, women are being raped by their own father. How much worse must it get before we act?" The argument stretched for hours. Some insisted on legal action, working within the system. Others demanded immediate intervention. Finally, a compromise emerged. A small team would travel to Bellevue, rescue the women, and gather the incriminating ledgers, while simultaneously sending documentation to abolitionist newspapers. Harrington would lead the mission. His knowledge of the plantation, its east wing, the overseer's routines, hidden entrances, was invaluable. Marcus, a freed slave experienced in guiding people along the Underground Railroad, joined them, along with 6 others. 2 nights later, the group gathered quietly along the riverbank, 3 miles from the plantation. They moved under the cover of darkness, silent through the sugarcane fields, each footstep measured, hearts racing. The kitchen door was unlocked, just as Clara, a longtime slave and secret chronicler of the plantation's horrors, had promised. They entered cautiously, water dripping from their clothes after slipping through irrigation ditches. The group split. Marcus and 4 men headed toward the east wing to free the women, while Harrington and his companions moved toward the study, aiming for the ledgers that held the proof of decades of crimes. Harrington hesitated at the study door. Something felt wrong. The lamps were lit, and there, behind his desk, sat Colonel Thaddeus Crane. A smug, dangerous calm etched across his face. "Good evening, Dr. Harrington. I have been expecting you." Before Harrington could react, armed overseers emerged from the shadows, rifles raised. His companions were seized immediately. Harrington demanded to know the fate of the others. "Your friends are being detained in the east wing," the colonel said. No one has been harmed, yet Harrington realized with chilling clarity that they had walked into a trap. Every plan they had made, every precaution taken, had been anticipated. The colonel's network was extensive, his reach terrifying. Yet even in that moment, Harrington's resolve hardened. They might be outnumbered, but the truth, the evidence, the witnesses, was still within reach, and he would see that truth brought to light, no matter the cost. Harrington's heart pounded as the overseers forced his companions to their knees. Colonel Crane rose slowly, his eyes glinting with cold amusement. "Did you really think I would not anticipate this?" he asked. "Judge Cartwright warned me that you had contacted abolitionists. Your clumsy conspiracy has been transparent from the beginning." The colonel circled the room, his calm menace filling every corner. Harrington demanded to know the fate of Marcus and the others. "They will join you shortly," Crane said, "and no one has been harmed, though that may change depending on your cooperation." Harrington's stomach churned. They were trapped, but he refused to show fear. Minutes later, the east wing doors opened. Marcus and the 4 men were marched in, bruised and bloodied, but alive. Their eyes betrayed their terror, but also determination. Harrington's chest tightened. The evidence, the ledgers, the women, they were all here. The colonel had underestimated their resolve. Then Clara was dragged into the study, her face swollen, her clothing torn, yet her eyes burned with defiance. You have been a thorn in my side for 15 years, the colonel hissed. Did you think your little book would make a difference? Clarara's voice was steady. You are a monster. One day, the truth about this place will destroy everything you have built. The colonel struck her a vicious blow, sending her sprawling. Harrington clenched his fists, fury mixing with helpless rage. But before he could act, a soft voice echoed through the room. Father, please stop. Eliza, pale and weak from childbirth, stood in the doorway. For the first time, the colonel looked surprised. She stepped forward, her presence calm but unyielding. You told us we were daughters, chosen and blessed. It was all a lie. We are not your daughters. We are prisoners. Our children are your property. The air shifted. The overseers hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their stance. That moment of pause was all Harrington needed. Marcus, injured but undeterred, lunged at the nearest guard, seizing a rifle. Chaos erupted. Harrington and his companions fought with desperate strength, each strike fueled by years of suppressed horror and outrage. A shot rang out. One overseer fell, clutching his leg, and Harrington grabbed the fallen rifle, aiming it directly at the colonel. Enough! His voice cut through the turmoil. Slowly the room stilled. The overseers froze, their employer held at gunpoint. For the first time, Crane was confronted with a reality he could not control. Eliza, Harrington said, keeping his eyes on the colonel, can you walk? Can you get your sisters and bring them here? She nodded, determination in every step. Minutes later, Caroline and Margaret joined her, eyes wide with fear, yet shining with the first glimmer of freedom. Together, the sisters revealed the truth, the diaries, the hidden evidence, the atrocities committed over decades. The colonel's carefully constructed world, built on lies and control, began to crumble in the face of unyielding courage and undeniable proof. Harrington felt a surge of hope. The fight was far from over, but the first victory had been won. The women were awake, the evidence was safe, and the seeds of justice, long suppressed, were finally taking root. The evacuation of Belleview Plantation began under the cover of a humid, moonless night. Harrington moved methodically, coordinating with Marcus and the remaining abolitionists. 9 children, from infants to toddlers, were quietly bundled into blankets, each small body trembling but unharmed. The sisters followed closely, their eyes darting to every shadow, every corner, aware that a single misstep could cost them everything. Clarara, despite her injuries, directed the removal of the ledgers and journals, her hands steady as she secured the irreplaceable evidence. Every scrap of documentation mattered. It was more than proof, it was a weapon against a system built on centuries of cruelty. The ledgers contained names, dates, payments, and details so damning that no court could ignore them once they reached the north. Harrington checked the dock. The small boats waited, barely visible on the black water. One by one, the children and women were lifted aboard. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret took the last spots, keeping close to the youngest, whispering soft words to calm their fear. The sisters had grown from frightened prisoners into determined survivors, each step of the escape a defiance against the world that had enslaved them. Behind them, the plantation loomed, silent and foreboding. Colonel Crane remained bound in his study, a symbol of the power that had ruled unchecked for decades, now reduced to impotent fury. Harrington glanced back, feeling the weight of history pressing down. The horrors that had unfolded here were unimaginable, yet the night carried hope in its fragile shadows. The boats pushed away from the dock, oars cutting silently through the Mississippi. Dawn began to stain the horizon with pale gold, and Harrington allowed himself a moment to breathe. Freedom was not yet complete, but it was near. The ledgers were secure, the children were alive, and the sisters were finally in control of their own destinies. By mid-morning, they reached a safe house in Philadelphia. The abolitionist network welcomed them, providing new identities, education, and support. Harrington and Marcus oversaw the placement of the children, ensuring they would grow up free from the legacy of Belleview. For the first time, the sisters smiled without fear. For the first time, the children played without the shadow of ownership. Harrington delivered the ledgers to the American Anti-Slavery Society. Within days, excerpts were published in newspapers across the North. The reaction was explosive. Details of the breeding program, the murdered infants, and the complicity of prominent families ignited outrage. In Louisiana, attempts to discredit the evidence failed. The careful network Crane had built began to unravel, his allies distancing themselves as the scandal spread like wildfire. Colonel Crane, untouched legally, lived out his remaining years isolated at Belleview, haunted by the collapse of his empire. The mansion fell into ruin, eventually reclaimed by the swamp, a silent testament to the corruption, cruelty, and eventual justice that had transpired. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret rebuilt their lives slowly. Each found a measure of peace, raising families and educating others, carrying the memory of Bellevue not as prisoners but as witnesses. Harrington continued his work, providing care for escaped slaves, never forgetting the horrors he had witnessed, yet driven by the hope that courage and truth could, even in the darkest places, prevail. The story of Belleview Plantation, though largely buried in history, endured in whispers, journals, and ledgers, a stark reminder of the extremes of human cruelty and the unyielding power of resistance. Years passed, and the story of Belleview Plantation became a quiet echo, known only to those who had lived through its horrors. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret settled into new lives far from Louisiana. Philadelphia became their sanctuary, a city that offered safety and anonymity. Eliza married a schoolteacher in 1848, raising 2 children with full knowledge of the darkness that had shaped her own beginnings. For the first time, she felt the freedom to nurture without fear. Caroline dedicated herself to teaching. She worked in schools for freed slaves, pouring her energy into education, believing that knowledge could break the chains her family had endured. Margaret struggled the most. The trauma of her early life lingered, a constant shadow over her days. Yet even she found purpose, assisting in abolitionist churches in Boston, helping others escape bondage and reclaim their dignity. The 9 children from the nursery were scattered across Pennsylvania and New York, each given a new name, a chance at life that Bellevue had denied them. Some flourished, growing into adulthood with resilience and determination. Others carried the psychological scars of their early conditioning, a reminder that freedom could heal some wounds, but not all. A few, haunted by memory and curiosity, returned to Louisiana years later, searching for the graves of siblings they barely remembered, only to find the plantation's cemetery plowed under, replaced with unmarked earth. Clara, the old slave whose courage had preserved the evidence, survived just long enough to see the escape succeed. She passed quietly in her sleep 6 months later, satisfied that her testimony had been heard and that justice, however delayed, had begun. Her journal, alongside the colonel's ledgers, was preserved in the archives of the American Anti-Slavery Society, a testament to the atrocities committed and the bravery of those who resisted. Harrington never returned to Louisiana. His medical license revoked and facing criminal charges for theft and conspiracy, he continued his work in Philadelphia, offering care to escaped slaves and advocating for their freedom. He remained a solitary figure, haunted by what he had witnessed at Bellevue, yet committed to fighting the injustices that persisted across the South. Colonel Thaddeus Crane died in 1852, a broken man whose empire had crumbled. No charges were ever brought against him. Louisiana authorities refused to act, citing jurisdiction and lack of evidence. Belleview Plantation fell into decay, its grandeur consumed by time and swamp, a silent witness to the cruelty that had once flourished there. Constance Crane lived quietly in New Orleans until her death in 1859, leaving a substantial bequest to the Pennsylvania Abolition Society and a letter acknowledging her complicity, an unspoken apology that remained in archives unseen by the world. Decades later, in 1923, a researcher stumbled upon Clarara's journal and the colonel's ledgers in the abolitionist records. Attempting to write the full history of Bellevue, she found publishers unwilling to print the disturbing truths, the story shelved for 70 more years. Today, Bellevue exists only in footnotes of history, a cautionary tale of greed, power, and the resilience of the human spirit. The land is now a wildlife preserve. Spanish moss drapes the live oaks. The river still flows past where the dock once stood, and beneath the undergrowth, the 17 unmarked graves remain, a quiet, haunting reminder that some stories are never fully forgotten, and that the truth, when unearthed, can endure far longer than the lies built to suppress it. As the years turned into decades, the story of Bellevue Plantation slowly faded from memory, buried beneath the larger tragedies of history, yet its shadow lingered, a chilling reminder of the extremes to which human ambition and cruelty could stretch. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret, once prisoners in their own home, became living testaments to resilience and courage. Each forged a life far removed from the horrors of their past, yet the memory of Bellevue shaped their choices, their compassion, and their commitment to justice. Eliza's home in Philadelphia became a sanctuary not just for her children, but for anyone in need. She spoke rarely of Bellevue, choosing instead to teach her children the meaning of freedom and morality, lessons her father had perverted beyond recognition. Caroline poured herself into education, guiding freed children toward literacy and independence. Margaret, scarred but unbroken, dedicated herself to those still seeking refuge from oppression, her faith and empathy a quiet rebellion against a lifetime of cruelty. The 9 children from the nursery, though scattered, carried fragments of the past. Some thrived in the promise of freedom, while others wrestled with the trauma that Bellevue had inflicted. A few made pilgrimages back to Louisiana, seeking to uncover the graves of siblings they barely remembered. All they found were unmarked earth and whispers of a story the world seemed unwilling to confront. Clarara's journal and the colonel's ledgers remained the enduring evidence of the atrocities committed at Bellevue. For decades, they rested in archives, largely ignored, until historians and researchers slowly began to unearth the truth. Each page revealed the dark legacy of forced breeding, murdered children, and a system built on unimaginable cruelty. The documents served as a testament, not just to the horrors of one plantation, but to the resilience of those who refused to remain silent. Colonel Thaddeus Crane, who had once wielded absolute power over lives, died a broken man. His mansion fell to ruin, and the land he once controlled became reclaimed by nature, the river flowing past the decayed dock, the swamp swallowing the remnants of his empire. Justice in the legal sense never touched him, yet the legacy he sought to create was obliterated by truth and courage. Constance Crane, whose silence had enabled much of his cruelty, left a quiet confession and a bequest that ensured some measure of restitution. Today, Bellevue exists only in fragments, a cautionary tale whispered in historical texts and preserved in the archives of abolitionist societies. Its story reminds us of humanity's capacity for both evil and courage, of the power of witnesses to resist, and of the resilience of those who survive. Spanish moss drapes the live oaks, the river flows as it always has, and somewhere beneath the undergrowth lie 17 unmarked graves, a stark reminder that even in the quietest corners, history remembers. As we reflect on Bellevue, we confront uncomfortable truths about power, complicity, and morality. We remember those who resisted, those who bore witness, and those who survived to tell the story. The past may be hidden, but the truth endures, waiting to be uncovered. If this story chills you, yet inspires a desire to uncover hidden histories, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who values the untold chapters of human history. Bellevue's story may be over, but the lessons it leaves behind are timeless. And remember, the past has many secrets still waiting to be revealed. Even decades after the fall of Bellevue, its shadow lingered, not in the bustling cities or in the records of ordinary life, but in quiet corners where memory refused to fade. Historians pored over the ledgers and Clara's journal, piecing together the full horror of what had occurred. Each page revealed new truths: the meticulous cruelty of Colonel Crane, the complicity of prominent families, and the stolen lives of children whose names had been lost to history. The documents became a touchstone for understanding the darkest excesses of slavery, a record too shocking to ignore but too painful for many to fully confront. Descendants of Bellevue's survivors carried the legacy forward in ways both subtle and profound. They became educators, writers, and activists, dedicating their lives to ensuring that history would not repeat itself. Family stories, whispered from generation to generation, intertwined with public records, creating a tapestry of memory that both honored and mourned the lives affected. These descendants understood that the legacy of Bellevue was not merely about suffering, but also about courage, resistance, and the power of truth. Meanwhile, the physical landscape of Bellevue slowly transformed. The mansion, once gleaming with white columns and oppressive grandeur, had long since succumbed to the swamp and the passage of time. Nature reclaimed the fields where enslaved bodies had toiled, and the river that had carried fleeing children to freedom continued its eternal course, indifferent to human cruelty. Archaeologists and historians occasionally visited the site, noting remnants of foundations and disturbed earth, but little else remained. Yet, even in absence, the memory of the plantation retained its weight. Museums, archives, and schools began to reference Bellevue in discussions about slavery's hidden atrocities. Clara's journal, once a quiet testament in a dusty archive, became a cornerstone of historical study, a voice that demanded recognition. Scholars debated the moral and ethical dimensions of what had occurred, using Bellevue to examine the intersections of power, gender, race, and human experimentation. Every lecture, article, or exhibit carried with it the echoes of those who had endured unimaginable suffering, ensuring that their experiences were not forgotten. And still, for those who had lived it, the trauma lingered. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret's descendants carried the weight of inherited memory, a mixture of pride and sorrow. Their lives were a testament to resilience, but they also bore the invisible scars of the past, the echoes of a world that had sought to strip them of autonomy and identity. Even as they thrived, even as they rebuilt, Bellevue remained a cautionary tale, an enduring reminder that evil often hides behind facades of civility, education, and apparent progress. Ultimately, Bellevue's story is a mirror held to history, a reflection of humanity's capacity for both atrocity and courage. The archives, the preserved documents, and the testimonies of survivors stand as permanent witnesses. They speak to those willing to listen, to question, and to remember. The story of Bellevue is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a call to vigilance, empathy, and action. The past whispers through the moss, draped oaks, and the flowing river. The truth matters, and those who dared to fight for it, no matter how quietly, ensured that it would not vanish. Even now, over a century later, Bellevue lives, not as a place, but as a warning, a memory, and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Years turned into decades, and the story of Bellevue became more than a cautionary tale. It became a symbol of the hidden atrocities that could thrive behind the veneer of wealth, status, and power. Scholars revisited Clarera's journal, Harrington's notes, and the colonel's ledgers, slowly reconstructing the lives erased by cruelty and indifference. Each new discovery sparked debates, articles, and lectures, but public consciousness remained fragmented. Some refused to believe such horrors could exist in civilized society, while others used Bellevue to push for reforms in education, human rights, and historical accountability. The descendants of those who had escaped Bellevue grew up carrying the stories of their mothers and aunts, stories both harrowing and inspiring. They inherited not only trauma but also resilience, a drive to rebuild lives that the colonel had sought to control. Eliza's lineage became educators, teaching about the value of freedom and the importance of moral courage. Caroline's children pursued social justice, working in communities long affected by systemic oppression. Margaret's legacy was quieter, marked by empathy and care, but no less profound, as she raised generations to understand both the weight of history and the power of choice. Across the Mississippi, the land that had once been Bellevue remained quiet. Nature slowly reclaimed the plantation, vines and moss weaving through the ruins, while the river carried its endless song downstream. Occasional visitors, historians, descendants, or curious travelers felt the eerie presence of the past. Local legends spoke of whispered cries among the live oaks or shadows that seemed to move beneath the Spanish moss. But these were faint echoes of a history that refused to be erased. Museums and archives in the North and East preserved Clarera's journal and the ledgers, making them accessible to researchers and educators. Exhibits displayed facsimiles, contextualizing the human cost of Bellevue for audiences removed from its immediate horrors. It became clear that the colonel's attempt to control and silence would fail, not because of legal intervention, but because truth, once unearthed, demanded to be heard. The ledgers, meticulously detailed and chilling, were a stark reminder of how systems of power could be manipulated for unspeakable purposes. In communities where the survivors had settled, their stories inspired generations. Children who had once known the fear of Bellevue grew up with the knowledge that their lives could be different. They carried lessons about courage, compassion, and the importance of resisting injustice. They told their own children not only who they were but also why they mattered, because memory was their inheritance, and truth their shield against the erasure that had claimed so many before them. The tale of Bellevue, once hidden, became a permanent thread in the fabric of history. It was a story of horror, yes, but also of defiance, survival, and the enduring human spirit. Even as the plantation crumbled and the swamps reclaimed its foundations, the lives it had affected continued to ripple outward, a testament to the fact that no amount of cruelty could fully extinguish freedom, dignity, or the pursuit of justice. Bellevue's name, whispered in history books and journals, remained a solemn warning that evil can flourish unseen, but courage, quiet, persistent, and moral, can endure far longer than oppression ever could. As the boats drifted down the Mississippi, the first rays of dawn cutting across the water, Harrington finally allowed himself a breath he had been holding for days. Around him, the women and children huddled together, exhausted but alive, their faces reflecting relief, fear, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The river carried them away from Bellevue, away from the tyranny that had defined their earliest memories. Behind them, the plantation loomed like a shadowed memory, the white columns gleaming in the morning light, a beautiful facade masking years of unimaginable cruelty. Harrington's eyes lingered on it, knowing that what had happened within those walls would haunt him forever. Yet there was a strange sense of closure in the thought that the colonel, once so absolute, was now powerless, confined by his own obsession with control. News traveled slowly at first. Whispers in towns along the river reached abolitionist circles, and when Harrington delivered the ledgers to the New York newspapers, the reaction was immediate. Northern presses printed every horrifying detail: the forced breeding, the 17 murdered infants, the complicity of Louisiana's elite. Readers recoiled, shocked into awareness, and for the first time, many could no longer deny the human cost of slavery. In Louisiana, the reaction was predictably defensive. Newspapers loyal to the planter class denounced the reports as lies. Judge Cartwright's statements dismissed the evidence as fabricated. Lawyers filed defamation suits. But the tide had turned in subtle, irreversible ways. Planters who had once boasted of wealth and influence now distanced themselves, fearful of scrutiny. The careful web of silence that had protected Belleview began to unravel. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret settled into their new lives in Philadelphia, slowly learning what freedom meant. They embraced it with cautious optimism, understanding that safety was fragile and memories could never be erased. The children, once pawns in the colonel's twisted designs, now had names, homes, and choices. The abolitionist network supported them, teaching them, nurturing them, and ensuring that the horrors of Bellevue would not claim another generation. Clara passed away peacefully, her final months filled with quiet satisfaction. She had lived long enough to know that her testimony mattered, that her meticulous records had given the oppressed a voice. Harrington continued his work in charity hospitals, haunted but resolute, dedicating the rest of his life to helping those who had nowhere else to turn. Belleview Plantation itself became a ghostly relic. The mansion decayed, swallowed by vines and swamp, a silent witness to the lives it had destroyed. And yet, even in ruin, it reminded the world of the resilience of those who dared to resist. The ledgers and journals preserved in Northern archives became tools of remembrance and education, teaching future generations the darkest possibilities of unchecked power and the courage required to confront it. The story of Bellevue is a chilling testament to human cruelty, but also a celebration of courage, resistance, and moral conviction. It is a reminder that even in the face of the deepest horrors, truth can prevail, and freedom can be reclaimed. As you reflect on this tale, remember, history hides many secrets. Some remain buried, but others, like Bellevue, demand to be uncovered. The past is watching, and the lessons it carries are timeless. If you are moved by this story, subscribe, share, and join us in exploring the forgotten shadows of history, because the truth deserves to be told. Years passed, and the echoes of Belleview Plantation continued to ripple through history, even if most of the world had forgotten its name. The story of Colonel Thaddeus Crane and his cruel experiments remained buried in obscure archives, yet it lingered in the lives of those who had escaped. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret carried the weight of their childhoods quietly, aware that freedom came with responsibility. The responsibility to remember, to bear witness, and to ensure the past did not repeat itself. Eliza's children grew up with stories of resilience and survival, their mother teaching them not to hide from the truth, no matter how horrific. She showed them that courage could flourish even in the darkest circumstances, that the strength to fight back was born of love and moral conviction. Caroline devoted herself to education, founding schools for freedmen and women, emphasizing both literacy and the unbreakable value of human dignity. Margaret, though scarred more deeply, found purpose in helping others heal from trauma, guiding young women through the same kinds of nightmares she had survived. The children from the nursery, scattered across Pennsylvania and New York, forged their own paths. Some embraced their new lives fully, leaving Bellevue behind as a distant shadow. Others wrestled with memories that could not be erased, searching for identities stolen from them, grappling with questions of heritage and belonging. Yet all were shaped by Clarara's bravery, by Harrington's defiance, and by the collective courage of those who had risked everything to ensure they could live free. In Louisiana, Bellevue itself faded into legend and ruin. Local lore spoke of a haunted mansion in the swamps, of white columns disappearing beneath vines, of the restless spirits of those who had suffered and died. Historians occasionally stumbled upon the ledgers and Clarara's journal, but their findings were too disturbing for popular publication. Yet the documentation survived, a quiet testament to the atrocities that power can commit when left unchecked. Harrington, who had survived both moral and physical battles, passed away quietly in 1867. He never married, never fully recovered from the horrors he witnessed, but his life's work, saving the children, preserving evidence, resisting cruelty, left an indelible mark. To the outside world, he was a doctor who had vanished into obscurity, yet in the lives he touched, he became a hero whose courage shaped destinies. The story of Bellevue remains a cautionary tale, a dark chapter in the history of human exploitation and systemic oppression. It reminds us that evil can be methodical, cloaked in civility and prosperity, and yet truth, witnessed, documented, and courageously acted upon, can unravel even the most carefully constructed deceptions. And so, the river continues to flow past the ruins, the swamps slowly reclaiming the land, the Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks as if in quiet mourning. Somewhere beneath the undergrowth lie the unmarked graves of 17 innocents, forgotten by most, remembered by history. Bellevue, though lost to time, lives on in memory, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth to endure. The past is never truly gone. It waits in hidden corners, in dusty archives, in whispered stories, ready to remind us that morality cannot be silenced, and that courage, even in the smallest acts, can change the course of history. Even as the decades passed, Belleview Plantation never fully disappeared from the collective consciousness of those who dared to remember. Scholars occasionally stumbled upon Clarara's journal and the colonel's ledgers, their pages yellowed and fragile, yet their words shocking in their clarity. For many, the details were too grotesque, too painful to digest. Publishers rejected manuscripts that attempted to tell the full story. Yet the documents endured, silent witnesses to crimes the world struggled to confront. Eliza, Caroline, and Margaret lived the rest of their lives carrying both the trauma of their early years and the strength they had gained from survival. They became living testaments to the power of resilience. Eliza's children, raised with stories of courage and moral conviction, grew into adults who valued freedom not merely as an abstract concept, but as a responsibility to uphold justice for others. Caroline's schools became sanctuaries of hope and education for generations of freedmen, while Margaret's work in Boston touched countless lives, guiding young women through the echoes of oppression that had once threatened to crush them. The 9 children from the nursery, though dispersed across the North, often pondered the shadows of their past. Some thrived, embracing the opportunities afforded by their newfound freedom. Others struggled, haunted by memories too fragmented to fully piece together. Yet all were linked by the courage of those who had risked everything to rescue them, by the unwavering determination of a small band of abolitionists who refused to allow evil to continue unchecked. Bellevue itself, left to decay, became a ghostly monument in the swamplands of Louisiana. Spanish moss draped the skeletal remains of the mansion, and the river flowed silently past, as if carrying the whispers of the past along with it. The land reclaimed by nature holds secrets that may never be fully unearthed, but it stands as a stark reminder of the extremes to which human beings can descend when power is unchecked. Harrington's life, though marked by exile and sorrow, was defined by moral courage. He worked quietly in Philadelphia, providing care to those who had escaped bondage, never seeking recognition, yet shaping history in ways that the world would never fully acknowledge. His name may not be remembered by most, but in the lives he touched, he left a legacy of bravery and humanity that cannot be erased. The story of Belleview is a testament to the enduring power of truth. It reminds us that oppression can hide behind wealth, influence, and civility, yet exposure, courage, and moral conviction can shatter even the most fortified systems of cruelty. History may obscure these stories, but they remain, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to look, to listen, and to remember. The past is a shadow that follows us, but it is also a teacher. Bellevue's secrets, though buried, speak to us still, of injustice, of resilience, and of the unbreakable human spirit. Somewhere in the swamps of Louisiana, beneath the undergrowth, lie the unmarked graves of 17 children. Their names may be lost, but their story endures, carried forward by those who refuse to forget, and by the courage of those who continue to confront the darkness with light.